There is a plant growing in wetlands, ditches, and pond edges across every state in the country. You've seen it your entire life. It's the tall brown-spiked plant that lines the edges of marshes and slow-moving water. You probably drove past some this week. Native American tribes across North America called it the supermarket of the swamp. And that name wasn't poetic exaggeration. The cattail provides something edible in every single season of the year: spring, summer, fall, and winter, from the same stand of plants, growing wild, requiring nothing from you. In the next 10 minutes, I want to show you the full food calendar of the cattail, what each part tastes like, how to harvest it safely, and why this plant fed entire populations for thousands of years while the modern world completely forgot it existed. Cattail, the scientific name is Typha latifolia, is one of the most extensively documented wild food plants in North American ethnobotany. Daniel Mowerman's Native American Ethnobotany Database, which compiles historical food use records from hundreds of tribes, lists cattail as a significant food source for the Blackfoot, the Ojibwe, the Paiute, the Navajo, the Iroquois, the Seminole, and dozens of other nations. The uses were comprehensive. Young spring shoots were eaten raw or cooked like asparagus. They were actually called Cossack asparagus by Russian peasants who used the same plant extensively in wetland regions of Eastern Europe. The green flower spikes in late spring were boiled and eaten like corn on the cob. The bright yellow pollen in midsummer was collected and mixed into flour for pancakes and bread. The starchy rootstocks were dug in fall and winter, roasted, or processed into a white starch flour. According to the USDA Plant Guide for Typha latifolia, the rootstocks contain approximately 30% starch by weight, comparable to potatoes, along with 7.8% crude protein. Research published in food science literature notes that a mature cattail stand can yield more starch per acre than most cultivated grain crops. Lewis and Clark documented eating cattail on their expedition. World War II survival manuals listed cattail as one of the most important wild food plants for American servicemen because of how widespread and multi-season it is. And then, like so many of the plants on this channel, the knowledge of how to use it just quietly disappeared from mainstream American culture. The cattail is unusual among wild food plants because different parts have very different nutritional profiles, and you harvest different parts in different seasons. Let me break it down. The young spring shoots, sometimes called cattail hearts, are the most vegetable-like part. They're high in water content, mild in flavor, and provide modest amounts of minerals including magnesium, potassium, and manganese. Per the USDA nutrient data, they're a reasonable source of vitamin B6 and dietary fiber. Think of them as a seasonal vegetable similar to leeks or asparagus. Good nutrition, mild caloric value. The pollen is where things get more significant. Cattail pollen is a protein-rich powder that has been used as a flour supplement for centuries. Analysis of cattail pollen shows it contains approximately 17% protein and significant starch content. Crucially, it's usable as a one-for-one substitute for wheat flour in pancakes, breads, and biscuits. It gives baked goods a golden yellow color and a mild, sweet, slightly nutty flavor. The rootstock starch is the caloric heavyweight. According to USDA documentation, cattail rootstocks contain around 30% starch and 7.8% crude protein by dry weight. In terms of raw carbohydrate energy, a productive cattail stand delivers more starch per acre than wheat or corn. For any family thinking about serious long-term food resilience, this is the statistic that matters most. The plant is also richer in calcium, iron, and potassium than potatoes or rice by weight, according to nutritional analyses cited in the USDA Plant Guide. This is what makes cattail genuinely different from every other plant I've covered on this channel. It doesn't have a season. It has 4 seasons. Spring, March through May in most of the U.S. This is when you harvest the young inner shoots. The green shoots that emerge from the water or wet ground look like fat, tightly rolled green cylinders. Peel back the outer layers and you find a pale, crisp inner core. Eat it raw. It tastes like a mild cucumber with a hint of corn. Or cook it like asparagus. You can also eat the base of the larger mature leaves in spring before they fully unfurl. Late spring into early summer, the green flower spikes. Before the spike opens and produces pollen, it's still green and compact, like a small hot dog on a stick. Cut them before they open. Husk off the outer leaves. Boil them for 5 to 10 minutes, and eat them like miniature corn on the cob. Brush with butter, add salt. They taste remarkably like corn. Midsummer, pollen season. The male flower at the top of the spike produces dense golden pollen for a short window of 2 to 3 weeks. Bend the pollen-bearing spike over a bag and shake it. You'll collect significant quantities of bright yellow powder. Mix it 50-50 with wheat flour and use it in any baked recipe. The pancakes and cornbread it produces are genuinely delicious. Fall and winter, rootstock harvest. Dig the horizontal underground rhizomes with a garden fork or shovel. They're white, starchy, and can be roasted directly, mashed, or processed into starch flour. Pound sections of rootstock in water. Allow the starch to settle to the bottom. Pour off the water and dry the white starch. It stores well and cooks like cornstarch. Cattails are one of the easiest wild plants to identify. There is genuinely nothing that looks quite like them. The tall, linear leaves, flat, gray-green, rising from 3 to 10 feet tall, depending on the season, and the distinctive brown cylindrical spike that looks like a hot dog or a brown velvet sausage on a stick are unlike any other plant. You cannot confuse them with anything dangerous once you know what you're looking for. They grow in shallow water, along pond edges, in roadside drainage ditches, in wetland areas, and anywhere with consistent standing water or very wet soil. They spread through underground rhizomes and tend to form dense stands rather than isolated plants. The one rule that overrides everything else with cattail: only harvest from clean water sources. Cattails are bioaccumulators. They absorb heavy metals, agricultural runoff chemicals, and pollutants from whatever water they're growing in. A cattail stand at the edge of a clean farm pond is a very different thing from a stand in a highway drainage ditch or a stream that receives agricultural runoff. If you're not certain the water is clean, don't harvest there. The most reliable sources are your own property if you have a clean pond or wet area, nature preserves where you have permission, or rural ponds away from agricultural land and roads. In any situation where you're unsure about water quality, err on the side of finding a different stand. Harvest shoots by reaching into the base of the plant under the water line and pulling or cutting the inner core free. Harvest pollen by bending and shaking. Harvest rhizomes with a long-handled fork, digging well out from the base of the plant. If you have a pond, a wet area, or even a large container that holds water, you can establish your own cattail stand. Once in, it will expand and produce food for decades without any care from you. Plant cattail rhizomes in spring. Dig sections of rootstock from a wild stand. Bring them home, keeping the roots wet, and push them into muddy soil at the water's edge at a depth of about 4 to 6 inches. Space them about 2 feet apart. Water them in if your site is dry. Then leave them alone. Cattails spread aggressively through underground rhizomes. Within 2 seasons, a small initial planting will establish a dense stand. Within 3 seasons, you'll be managing them to keep them from spreading further rather than worrying about whether they're growing. One practical note: in a garden pond context, plant cattails in submerged containers to control their spread. Without a container, they'll colonize any wet area completely within a few years. That's either a feature or a problem, depending on how much space you have. The food output from an established stand is substantial. A modest 10-foot by 10-foot stand can provide shoots through the whole spring season, a meaningful pollen harvest in midsummer, and rootstock starch through fall and winter. All 4 seasons, all from one corner of your yard, permanently, at zero cost after the initial planting. The cattail is not an obscure or exotic plant. It's growing in every state. It's visible from every highway that passes near a body of water. And for thousands of years, it was the backbone of wild food knowledge across this continent. That knowledge didn't disappear because the plant got harder to find or less nutritious. It disappeared because grocery stores made it easier to buy food than to learn it, which is a reasonable trade most of the time. But it means most Americans are now one generation removed from knowing how to feed themselves from the land that's right outside. Subscribe if that matters to you. In the next video, I'm covering a plant that's been used as a lemon substitute across European and North American cooking for centuries, grows like a weed in almost every garden, and has a vitamin C content comparable to citrus fruit, from leaves that most people are pulling out as weeds right now.